Manifest Destiny, what is the appeal of the American West to American people? Many people go out west because of economic opportunity. The Panic of 1837 had caused many people to lose investments that they had made, banks closed. So some went out to the west into lands that were not owned by the American government, so therefore were not legally accessible to American people. They went out into these areas anyway. Many for farming opportunities, and of course when like individual citizens went out for farming, the merchants are going to follow them so that they can provide for them potentially any goods that they might need. Speculators are also going to go out. Now anyone who's a speculator is just somebody who intends to make a profit out of buying up something. So going out and buying up land, hoping that they can turn around and sell that land for a profit. So there are a lot of reasons that people go out into the West. Of course, mentioned already, merchants are going to go out seeking new markets. They're going to follow those farmers and miners who go out. One of the first locations that Americans will go into, Oregon Territory. The first settlers to go into the Oregon Territory went into the 1830s as missionaries, and they settled the beautiful fertile valley there in Oregon on the western side of the Rocky Mountains. This also allowed access for the American people to a new market for foreign trade. Asia now became accessible via the Pacific Ocean, and Commodore Matthew Perry was one of those Americans who sought to open up trade with China as a result of this new access to the Pacific Ocean, because so many Americans were settling now and traveling very far west. So Manifest Destiny, this belief that the West was America's to claim. Now, Native Americans settled this area. Effects obviously on Native American communities. You're going to have conflict with the settlers as the settlers move in. The buffalo is depleted. The number of buffalo will fall. Some Native Americans will assimilate as the number of settlers come in, meaning they'll take on white culture. Those who feel that, you know, the dominant American culture is too big of a force to oppose will assimilate, but then there are those who oppose. And in the 1830s, that opposition comes through a series of fights that we call the Black Hawk Wars. A prophet rose up in the Illinois area, Iowa area, who believed that the natives were destined to, he had actually a dream, he had this prophetic experience, and he urged some chiefs to join a coalition to oppose the encroaching whites. And Chief Black Hawk, after hearing this prophecy, will agree to lead. The Sauk and the Fox Indians are defeated and they're forced to move west of the Mississippi River. And this happens along the same time as the Trail of Tears occurs in the southeast portion. So the Sauk and the Fox Indians will be forcibly moved west of the Mississippi River. Okay, so the term middle ground refers to this area where there's no dominance of American settlers and there's no dominance of Native American people. And this is often a place where trading occurs. The middle ground was west of the Mississippi River after the 1830 Indian Removal Act. The Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1851, is a very important thing to know what this treaty does. So the treaty promises to Native people this sort of great reservation, as some people call it. The American government will meet with chiefs of a number of different tribes that include the Lakota and Dakota Sioux. The Arapaho will be represented there. We'll talk a little bit more, though, about how Native people feel about these hierarchical systems and having chiefs sign treaties for them. We know that Native people don't see their government in this representative fashion that we do. But nevertheless, there are chiefs from the Dakota Lakota Sioux, Arapaho, there are Nez Perce Indians represented there. So there's a great deal of Native tribes will be represented. The Crow Indians will be represented at the Treaty of Fort Laramie. They meet at Fort Laramie in 1851, and the agreement is that the U.S. will be allowed to build forts through the area for settlers and pioneers to travel through. So natives agreed for forts to be built. They agreed not to attack settlers traveling through as long as they're not violating the terms of the treaty. And the U.S. government agrees to this Great Plains region that natives will have full autonomy of the lands east of the Rocky Mountains, west of the Mississippi River, north of the Arkansas River, all the way to the Canadian border. So this Great Plains region was promised to Native people, but as the number of settlers flooding into the west grows and the number of buffalo and elk will fall, attacks will be made on settlers coming through the area, and so the U.S. they'll renege on promises that they've made. Okay, let's talk about some of the trails that settlers take going out west. The Santa Fe Trail, mostly merchants will travel the Santa Fe Trail. Santa Fe Trail goes through hostile Indian territory. Usually in the spring months, these merchants will travel down in the southwest in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they'll trade their goods there and usually travel back into the States. But the Santa Fe Trail is taken highly by merchants, and they're going into hostile Indian territory. They do travel together in caravans and bands for protection because the Comanches are quite warring. And then the Oregon Trail takes settlers to the northwest. The Oregon Trail goes through the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and it ends in Portland, Oregon. Once in Portland, Oregon, some pioneers and settlers will go on into California. From there, Oregon offers lush, green, fertile farmland. The temperatures do get pretty cold there, but it is good for farming, and a lot of Americans will go into the Oregon Territory for this new opportunity. Some of them will take Conestoga wagons, these covered wagons, but most of them walk and push hand carts. And it takes months to travel the Oregon Trail, and it's deadly. As many as 1/3 of the pioneers will die on the trail. Those who are traveling these trails will not rarely but often see carcasses of animals and people laying along the trails. So, and disease is probably the #1 killer of pioneers taking the trails. Okay, so we'll call them exodusers or pioneers moving outside of the boundaries of the United States of America in the 1840s. The Mormons are a group who migrate out west. Now, the Mormons will go into Salt Lake City, Utah, and their exodus is more of a fleeing the American government. Instead of taking their American identity with them, they're fleeing religious persecution. The Mormons believe in polygamy, and they were persecuted in their original home in New York, and then they went out to Nauvoo, Illinois, and Joseph Smith, their leader, was assassinated there in Nauvoo, Illinois, and then Joseph Smith's brother was also killed there too. They were jailed after they had they'd broken into a printing press and damaged the printing press's supplies there. but of course the newspaper had published some nasty stuff about them. Well, anyway, Joseph Smith and his brother were jailed, and while they were in jail, some of the townspeople broke into the jail and killed them. Brigham Young then takes many of the people of the Mormon faith out to Salt Lake City, Utah, and they're in this barren desert there, but they use irrigation systems to farm, and they have collective ownership of their water sources, of the forest in their area, but they also allot individual plots of land to families according to size. So the Mormons are a group of people who impact the development of the American West. When you read about the American West, it's not uncommon to read about someone who is Mormon or something about the Mormon presence in the American West. So that's important to know. Okay, territorial disputes. Oregon in the 1840s, settlers in the Oregon Territory want to be annexed. A great number, somewhere around 3,000. I think in the 30s it was 3,000, had grown to about 10,000 by the 1840s. So some 10,000 Americans were settled in the Oregon Territory, and they wanted negotiations with Britain to annex or to take it on. And the slogan that was printed by a newspaper was 5440 or fight, or we want all of it. We want all of Oregon up to the 5440 parallel line. When negotiations commenced with Britain about a boundary, the American government agreed on the 49th parallel. There were already disputes taking place in Texas, and the U.S. government didn't want to risk another war, so they agreed to a little bit more southern latitude. The 49th parallel became the boundary between the U.S. and what is present-day Canada. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Americans settling in Texas. American settlement in Texas began with the Mexican government asking Americans to come in. So in 1820, Mexico won its independence from Spain. Okay, they became an independent nation. But the nation was not, it was unstable. This new country, really unstable. And in their southern part, they had more control, but in their northern territories, they really lacked control. In the northern territories of Texas, New Mexico, and California, the presence of Mexicans in that area, very, very small. So the Mexicans decided they'd do what the Americans did and increase white settlement in the territory to deter native presence in the territory. So Mexico invited Americans in. They just had to convert to Roman Catholicism. They had to agree to obey Mexican laws, and they were granted large sums of land for very, very cheap. Offering land grants. One of those American agents who was given a large land plot to sell and entice Americans to come over into Mexico is Stephen F. Austin. He founded the colony of Austin, Texas. His group of settlers, they've been called the 300, Stephen F. Austin's old 300s, about 177 farm acres were given to about 300 families, so 177 farming acres per family. Austin developed this colony based on really American principles and American identity, and he petitioned the Mexican government over and over for more local control of government to allow them to pass their own laws, collect their own taxes, govern themselves. Another issue of content between the Mexican government and the settlers there was the issue of slavery. Mexico had outlawed it, and Americans were bringing in their slaves as they came in as farmers. So Americans were invited, come to Texas, but then By 1832, the door was closed. They closed